Hi everyone, delighted to share with you this presentation around talent perception. And I'm going to go into some real detail around just the brilliant basics. So first of all, what is talent? What is potential? How do we perceive talent? And some of the areas around talent recruitment and retention and development, and discussions around that. Now, what this course won't talk about is, and these are really big areas as well, but areas such as relative age effect, data analytics, and how data is used in data-driven strategies to recruit and identify talent, the use of profiles or characteristics traits that a lot of clubs and organizations, federations, coaches are using to identify and retain talent based on, player profiles that meet the requirements of that club or the preferences of a certain individual coach or whoever it may be, the director of football or director of recruitment or whatever it may be. So these are areas that, again, I would encourage you to explore in your own time. And there's certainly influential factors in how we're identifying, finding talent in the first instance, recruiting them in and retaining them. And we know that a reason why this is a really interesting topic is that finding, recruiting and retaining talent is a global challenge, and it's across all sports. Now, the experiences that I'm going to share with you are from football, and the examples are from football. But of course, the principles can be applied across different sports all over the world, for anyone listening. Now, we know that there's a great deal of inefficiencies in how talent is introduced and into clubs and identified and nurtured. And I would encourage you to, read some of the research articles that we share with you throughout this presentation and explore in your own time in a bit more detail of what that looks like. But some of the things that we're going to talk about through today is understanding the selection strategies that influence the success of that individual when we're bringing them in. And I would encourage you to really consider these 3 R's as a strategy for your recruitment, because of course we can use data, and I do as well. And I currently work and mentor with a number of different clubs and coaches working at different levels. And obviously I have access to and support them in different ways, and access to some of the information that they're doing around talent development, talent identification, and so on. But it's interesting because, although data will play a part in it, and we'll use data, whether it's looking at the stats around that individual and how successful they are, the potential, and judging certain areas where we think actually they've got an accelerated growth here, or they could really affect here, and so on. It constructively aligns with the values that our club has, or the profile that we have, what we're looking for in a player at this particular age. We expect him to do this, or in this position, or this group of individuals around him, he's statistically been found to create this many goals, or whatever it may be. That's great, and if you've got the budget and the technology and the resources, fantastic. What this presentation is going to really go into is trying to avoid too much of the noise, but just talking about the brilliant basics, trying to get the basic stuff right for anyone listening, whether you're at a top level or a grassroots level. Because when we're talking about talent, we're making real conscious decisions about how we select players that can have an influence on their success as well as ours. And what we're going to talk about is the understanding that we're seeing talent from identification and method and development perspective as non-linear. There's a lot of methods in place now where a lot of clubs and organizations and individuals will see talent as linear, performance as linear. They'll look at here and they'll expect them to be here, and it can go down there. And it's going from this age group to that age group. It's not a linear process. We know that learning, performance, development is non-linear. So a lot of the examples I'll share with you are from, non-linear perspectives. Recognize that there's going to be accelerated periods of growth, and there's going to be accelerated periods of regression, for different reasons. The importance of considering social, cultural constraints, influences, determinants that will have an impact on that individual, whether it's their sleep patterns, their habits, their physiological changes, the parenting, the support network, the player care, the wraparound care, how that can have an influence, the culture, You can identify an individual and bring a certain individual into an organization, and they can really struggle, not adapt well, find it very difficult to connect with people, and they struggle in that environment. But that same individual can go into another environment and thrive and grow and be really successful and worth a hell of a lot of money. So again, it's understanding, well, why is that? Who are the people around the individual that's influencing them? What's the culture in the organization or the team that they're stepping into? What other challenges have they faced? The medical history, what's some of the vocabulary that they're being exposed to? How does that influence their coachability, their ability to take on board information and so on? And other stuff that that's unwritten. So there's a lot of factors that go into not only how we identify, but how we nurture and develop talent from a performance perspective as well as a learning perspective. And again, I would encourage you to look at some of these articles in your own time, whether it's around, bio banding or birthday banding, transfer talent, the process of talent transfer, how people are using certain specialized sampling to identify talent at early ages or wherever it may be. So again, these are research articles that will tap into not just football, but a number of different sports as well. And, to lead on to that opening statement where I said, I would encourage you to take on board this strategy around your recruitment, it would be around the 3 R's. So the 3 R's are, how do we recruit, retain, and regain? So again, it's this brilliant basic stuff. So recruit, retain, regain. How do we get them in the building? When we get them in, how do we keep them? What are we doing to ensure that they're being the best that they can be, and we're maximizing their strengths and we're making their talent count? And if we lose them, how can we get them back? Or if we can't get them back, how do we replace them with somebody else? Because we know that there'll be decisions made where that player may leave himself or herself, or we might decide to release the player, or the player might decide to leave on other circumstances. So again, what's the exit strategy? How are we tracking their development? Are we keeping an eye on what they're doing? Can we find ways to bring them back if it's part of their development that they've had to go to another level, but hopefully we can bring them back in. So again, what are we doing around that type of stuff? So again, recruit, retain, regain. And that could also hold a huge conversation for development when you're working within your staff, within a multidisciplinary team. How do we recruit people, So going into the objectives of this course, we're going to talk about what is talent, what is potential, what's the role of the scout, or it has multiple titles, talent detector, talent reporter. I've seen it all. Different clubs, different federations have different terms for this individual, director of recruitment or wherever it may be. What is the role of the person who's trying to identify this talent and support them? What is talent development and what is talent perception? And what are some of the influences around how we perceive talent? So really, really important. And again, is it constructively aligned? So it's really important that there's a clear alignment between expectation and recruitment, because there's so many examples where if there's no communication, and it's quite difficult, the larger the organization, the more channels, often communication can get missed, but there'll often be a disalignment between individuals that may have been recruited by somebody else, that have been invited to a training session or wherever it may be. And the coach is going, I'm not too sure he's not good enough, or how's he got in, or whatever. So again, is there a communication between what the coaches think good looks like and what the recruitment team thinks good look like? And is that constructively aligned? How does that mirror in terms of the expectations that a club wants and the recruitment strategy? Are they aligned? So again, there's conversations around that. It's really important to know that we've got to get this right. How do we make their talent count and matter? And it's important that we identify, well, what is their talent? What got them in the building in the first place? And there's a statistic there that I'm sharing with you around, Michael Calvin's book, No Hunger in Paradise. There was a documentary as well several years ago where 0.0012% that have gone from the youth ages within an academy structure will go on and play in the Premier League. So statistically, you've got more chance of walking out the front door and getting hit by a meteorite statistically than you have playing in the Premier League. So again, we know that not many players will go on and graduate to the top levels. We know that most players, when they sign their first contract, will be out of the game within a year to 2, 3 if they're lucky. There's a lot of players that even at 21 to 23 are no longer playing. And there's even other statistics that have come out that it's before that, and again, retention rates and so on. And we know that not everyone can be an elite, high-performing athlete. But where are we measuring talent? If we've brought them in and we said they're talented, why has that suddenly changed if it has changed? So it's really important that we recognize and if we're seeing value in somebody, can we make sure that we're retaining that value and doing everything we can to support that individual to reach their potential and go beyond their potential expectations? Talent isn't just what you can perform, in terms of player actions, the ability to cross a ball, to shoot, to pass, to intercept, whatever it may be. Their talent may be something else. And can we find ways to redirect their talent? If they're not going to go on and play in the Premier League, can they still have a career in the game? If they can't have a career at the lower levels, can they have a career in non-league? Can they have a career as a coach? Can they have a career as an analyst? Can they have a career as whatever? The players that are coming through, certainly the academy system now, but even at grassroots level, there's some outstanding work that's going on, probably more so now because of platforms like Ulearnably, platforms with the FAs and with many different federations, so much information on YouTube. There's a lot of noise, but there's a lot of information. There's a lot of content now. So coaches are probably more educated now than ever before. Players are coming through a different style of teaching and coaching now than previously. And the player now is getting some real rich experiences that should be designed around developing those life skills that should make him more employable than ever before. So can we find other ways to tap into the talent? If they're a natural leader, can we find ways to develop those leadership qualities? And it might not be on the pitch, it might be off the pitch. So there's different things that we can do. And again, how do we measure talent? How do we measure progress? What does our alumni look like? Often a lot of clubs will say, these are the players that we've brought in, these are the ones we've sold, these are the ones that have graduated into the first team, these are the ones who have played X number of 100 appearances or played at this level or whatever. That's success. That may be one measure of success. What else? What are other measures of success? How many are still involved in the club now? How many are still involved in the sport? How many of those players didn't get through because of your system? How many didn't get through in spite of the system or got through in spite of the system? So it's understanding all these different type of things as well. Now, what we're going to delve really into is understanding our bias. So again, I mentioned before, we're not going to talk too much about bio-banding strategies or relative age effect and how to combat that and so on, because there's probably enough content out there already. For me, it's really getting down to what are the brilliant basics, and let's be more self-aware of that. So with that, it's understanding our bias. So what is confirmation bias? What do we mean by that? What's selection bias and what's information bias? And one of the things you can take on board from this presentation is that bias is any systematic error in the design, because confirmation bias is a tendency where you'll tend to look for things that will confirm your pre-existing belief. So you'll look for, if I've got a belief where I love seeing this player and I'm always trying to catch him doing things well, and I'm looking for that, and I'll find reasons to support that belief. There's a bias there. And I might miss stuff that's really important. So of course it's important to have subjectivity and objectivity, but we've got to be clear in our objectivity. When we're making decisions, there could be confirmation bias around catching not doing things well. You're always seeing him turn up late. You're always seeing him for whatever reason, or he's seeing him not make the runs that he could be making. And there's another reason I see he's not going to be able to play at this level and he needs to be doing this or whatever it may be. So again, you're finding tendencies to look for certain things that will confirm a pre-existing belief or a theory about that player or about their potential. It could even relate to players from that area never ever do well. There's something about them, or this player's got a history of this. And so again, that can be a limiting factor in making decisions when we're deciding whether to retain, release, proceed, stop, whatever it may be. It could be even as simple as decisions around when they do their best work. And we might find things that we think are certain tendencies or traits. There's a common theme that appears that, again, that supports that existing belief around that individual or around how we recruited that player or how we should recruit, where the best players come from, where the best talent is, what talent looks like. I've met so many coaches who have this affinity with little players who are creative, and we all love them. I love, genius little players, and they can find little clever ways to unlock defenses, and or little midfield players who are Roy the Rovers, tackle, win. And then I might have a bias towards that. Whereas the other players who might not be similar style of player as, let's say, if I was a top level midfielder, let's hypothetically, they might not play like I did. So I might eliminate them potentially without even being realizing it. So it's being aware of your blind spots, it's being aware of your unconscious bias. And there's a lot more examples that you can go into, but confirmation bias, put simply, is where you're looking for things and you'll tend to look for things that confirm that bias, that belief. Selection bias is the way in which we select that information. So the way in which we may select players that creates apparent associations between information, the way in which we choose to see things or not, as the case may be. So that's selection bias. So we've got the confirmation bias, which is we tend to look for the things that confirm what we see. And then selection is specifically choosing the bits that we want to pay more attention to and potentially either skillfully neglecting or unconsciously not even, unconsciously unaware of the things that we'll deselect as a result. And then information bias is the way in which we convey that information to other people, how we remark upon that. So again, there's many examples where if we're in a round table, we're discussing a particular player or group of players, or it could be a recruitment strategy, it could be why this player needs to play up in this particular game, play across an age group, play wherever it may be. The way in which we'll position our argument, the information, to others is done in a way that leads to a biased view, to lead to the view that we have. So we're trying to influence their perspective to see it from ours. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that because we'll all do it. But the danger is not being aware of it. So are you aware that by potentially choosing to share certain information and not others, and choosing what to exaggerate certain facts and make them sound better or not, as the case may be, how that can have an impact on a biased view about that player? It's not giving the full rounded perspective that can challenge that view set. So again, it's a dangerous area because often coaches, when they're talking about things or they're making decisions, they'll withdraw the information that will go against that biased view potentially. So it's clever in how we can convey that. So this is a useful task for you to stop the video and start to think about, what are your biases? What are some of the things that you value most? And I would encourage you to spend a lot of time doing this. It could be an initial task, what you do for 5 minutes, and it could be something that you can explore and discuss with other people. But I'd really encourage you to think about, what are your biases? What do you tend to look for? What do you value most in players? What excites you? What would you pay a premium on? What do you have a tendency to look for? When you're describing a player, what are some of the words that you tend to use? How would you describe bad? What does bad look like? How would you remark upon those? How do you select certain things? So what process do you use to identify and select and form associations between information to reinforce that belief. And then finally, how do you convey that message to others that influences that biased view? So this is a great task to explore deeper. Now, this is the first coach task I want you to think about now, where straight off the bat, within 30 seconds, what do you see? 30 seconds, pause the video, stare at this image for 30 seconds, which is based around your perception, and write down, what do you see right now? Describe or write down on the piece of paper, what is the image that you see? After 30 seconds, you may feel that you've seen an image of a woman. Some of you may have seen an image of someone playing like I guess a saxophone or something. Some might have been able to see both. What's really interesting in that is that where you look and how paying attention to one thing will make you potentially blind to others. Okay? Again, what do you see? So in this image, you can see that from one person's perspective, it's a 6, but from somebody else's, it's a 9. And this is really important when we're talking about what is talent, and we're trying to discuss talent and perception and development and learning. Both people can have different arguments and different perspectives, but neither person can be wrong. You both can be right. So it's really interesting. Often people perceive that, you know, from the angle I'm looking at it, it's this is what I see, and I'm right. So therefore he must be wrong. But that's not necessarily the case. You can both be looking at the same thing, the same problem, come up with 2 different answers, and you can both be right. So it's understanding that and tapping into, well, what did you see? Because I didn't see that, or I can't see that. So it's really important when we're talking about perspective, okay, and changing your viewpoint. So how can you reposition your viewpoint to see it from something else? Another 30-second task, pause the video, 30 seconds. What do you see? And write it down. After 30 seconds, it'd be interesting to see what you've seen in the image. Again, it's similar to previous images where you may see one animal, you may see 2, you may see a completely different animal to something else, or the next time you watch it, you see something else. So again, it's based around perception. And a similar one before where, another example, one person sees 4, one person's like, no, there's 3, it's definitely 3. And you can see it from both perspectives by looking at it from ours. So again, it's how do we look at arguments? When we're looking at things, how do we see things from all angles? And really trying to get to the truth and the facts of that detail. I want you to watch this awareness task. Now, short task, awareness test around what do you see? Listen to the video. There'll be an instruction there for you to watch. Some of you may have already seen this video before. I've seen it many, many times. It's hard for me not to see what you're about to see. So here we go.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? Go! The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear? Go!
Now, this video I've seen a million times. It's hard for me not to see the moonwalking bear now. But it's a great example. I remember the very first time I watched it, I was focusing so much on the white team. And I actually did it as a CPD event back in, I think it was 2015 or whatever it was, for coaches. And I asked them to count the number of passes for the other team 13. As well. And again, nobody saw the moonwalking bear. So it's just a great example of how you try and see everything, you can see nothing. Sometimes being really purposeful in your observation, again, as an example, I'm focusing in on, I'm only watching the white team, I'm not watching the blacks, but I'm missing information. So the way our eyes work, we can't see everything. Some of you, even watching that task, may not have come up with the answer 13. Some may have come up with 12, 11, 10. I've heard different examples. So again, it's understanding that we're not all, what we see with our eyes isn't necessarily the most accurate version of what actually happened. The beauty of video is that we can watch it back. And it's a great example around perception. So here's another task what I want you to consider. And again, I want you to explore this, whether you're a soccer coach, football coach, or a hockey or a tennis, whatever sport you may be. I want you to really position yourself in the mind of other sports. What does great look like across all sports? And is there a commonality with that? Is there certain trends that we tend to see? What does good, great, outstanding look like in your particular sport? And how might that differ across other sports? Because there's examples that we can take from some of the best athletes in the world that we can certainly introduce into our sport for sure. This task is really simple. I want you to spend a bit of time and write down or type, what is your definition for talent? So what is talent and what is potential? How would you define these terms? And I want you to share them with others. So when you write down that term of what is talent, do you have a clear definition? And when I've done this live, some people have really struggled with it. They've either waffled on or they've had loads of big words. Hasn't been a simple and easy description for what is talent. So I want you to really think about what is talent? How would you describe it? How would you define it? And what is potential? And then share that with somebody else in your organization or somewhere else and see if they align and try and tap into, well, why do you think the way that you do, you know, and that type of thing, and share ideas. Once you've done that task, again, here's an example of what our definition is. And this isn't the definitive definition, but these are examples that have been adapted from, you know, a research paper there in 2012, that talent is a self-developed skills that enable athletes, players, and individuals to perform at their highest level. Self-developed skills, okay? And again, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Potential, our definition for potential drawn from this research would be around the level of growth an individual can develop into that's unknown and not always measurable. Another quick task for you, 1 minute. What are some of the key words or potential phrase maybe in each of these descriptions that stand out to you? Have a think, write them down. Once you've done that, again, once you've paused the video and you've had a think, these would be mine. And I emphasize the first one probably, self-developed. I think that's an interesting concept when we think about talent, because often a lot of coaches see themselves as, you know, the pioneers behind developing these individuals. They may have had an influence on it for sure. We all have through the designs and the environments that we're creating. But who scored the goal? Who played the pass? Who intercepted the ball? Who did what? It was the player. What are they doing in their own time outside of our time, our contact time, that's enhancing their development? So again, it's interesting, you know, and who made their careers. We've got to see it as individuals are driving their own process. So I think it's quite interesting that we're seeing talent as self-developed and self-developed skills, their ability to perform at their highest level. And potential, for me, the interesting one was that the level of growth, because that's a bit there that even that could be a really interesting discussion and CPD event around that. And the fact that it's in an area that's unknown and not always measurable. We don't always know necessarily, we don't know, it's unknown what their full potential could be. We may have an idea, but it's not always measurable. So how do you factor in for that? Okay. Now, short task, 3 minutes, write down your initial thoughts, pause the video. What is a good player? And again, I've asked you these questions already. What does great look like? What does outstanding look like? But I want you to just answer this simple question. What is a good player or good athlete for you? And how do you evaluate this? 3 minutes, write down your initial thoughts. Now, once you've done that, you may have seen people send, even ones who have done this course with me live or through the platform, they've sent their reflections in, and they've often said a good player is someone who's a self-learner, who takes responsibility for their own actions, can solve problems, somebody who's got an outstanding attitude to learning, who's coachable, who's a leader, who's this, who's that. Okay, how those are good qualities. It's interesting how, other coaches may say someone who's technically proficient, that's a good player. So again, it'll be interesting for you to see, where does your lens go? And if we were to talk about pillars, I'm not too keen on it, but if we were to compartmentalize the individual into sort of technical, tactical, psychological, social, physical, where does your lens tend to go? Is it more on the psych-social? Is it more on the physical? Is it all? Is it just technical? It's really interesting. Again, it'll lead on to some of your biases as well. How do you evaluate this is a really tough question. That's something that's really tough for most to answer, because, again, is it objective or is it predominantly subjective? And how do you know it's the most effective and efficient way of measuring what you think is a good player? So we've spoke about, where do you look at? So again, if you were to compartmentalize that quality or the qualities in a good player, where do you look first? What do you look for first? Is it technical, tactical? Is it their ability to, from a football perspective, handle the ball, stay on the ball, play out, find clever ways to break a line, to unlock a defense, to get out of trouble, their ability to control the game, the leadership skills, the communication, the toughness, the resilience, aggression, controlled aggression, the physical aspects, the physical qualities. I've met a lot of coaches who tend to, from my experience, they'll look first at the player's physical attributes and then their technical, tactical, and then the rest later. And mainly physical. They'll look at how quick he is, how big he is, strong, how resilient they are to dealing with body contact. Do they find ways to, again, adapt to different intensities? Can they demonstrate a physical capacity, a physical potential? How do they move? Are they good movers? So these are all areas that you can think about. And when you're trying to look at this and answer this question, it's important, because the role of our job as identifying talent, whether a coach, a scout, whatever term we may use, how purposeful are we in our observation? And does your observation tend to lean more towards the right side or the left side of this model, which is key. Here are some discussion topics that I would encourage you to explore again in more detail. And you could do this as part of a CPD. You could do this with some of your coaches in your club. You could do this on your own. Topics one would be, what do we mean by and the talent that shouts versus talent that whispers? So what do we mean by that? What are some of the positives and negatives? So what are the trade-offs of that? What is a positive? So talent that shouts is the obvious. Everyone can see that individual's talented. What about the talent that whispers? How do we see them? Do they get missed? So, and what are the advantages and negatives of those things? So talent that shouts versus talent that whispers. Chronological age, coaching age versus coaching age. So again, understanding when they were born versus the number of years they've been coaching. Again, their coaching age or their experiences, their training age at that level. How many years experiences have they had being coached by a professionally licensed coach or in an academy setting or development center, years experience with the club. What's their training age, versus even their playing age? Chronologically, there might be a 10-year-old, but their playing age might be 5. They haven't been playing for long. Or it might be they've only just started, it might be 0. They might have come into the game late. Michael Beale once used a great quote about, again, age of both feet. So again, it could be that one player where's his dominance, his foot dominance? Let's say he's got an outstanding left foot, okay, or below average, let's say right foot. His left foot might be 12, might be 20 years old, 30 years old, but his right foot is 5. So there's a huge disbalance there. So again, it's understanding those things. You know, how coachable are they? What do we mean by coachability? Why is that an important factor when we're talking about talent development and talent perception? How we perceive individuals. Again, it comes back to confirmation bias. He's not coachable. How do we know that? You know, have you done a psychological test to measure potential traits that might display a tendency toward not being coachable or being coachable? Is there a reason why they're displaying those attributes, maybe? Is it because of the way they're being coached? Is it other factors that are influencing, again, from a social perspective, the cultural constraints, the environment? You know, so coachability, what does it look like? How do we know they're not coachable? You know, physical age versus chronological age. Physically, there might be a 14-year-old. Technically, tactically, there may be 12. It could be the other way around. It could be, you know, we've got many players who chronologically, they're a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old or an under 14, whatever it may be, but physically they're younger. You know, they could be a teenager playing in a real young boy, 10-year-old body, or the other way, as we've said, you know, you could be a young teenager playing in a man's body. You know, they're really physically developed and early. So again, areas around that, and even understanding, not trying to use terms and coin certain things of labels around, right, he's an early developer or he's a late developer. That could be a topic. What do we mean by early developers and late developers? Again, often people will associate those titles to physical height, maturity, whatever it may be. That doesn't necessarily mean they're a late developer or an early developer. You know, you might have a player who is small per se, but that doesn't mean he's a late developer. He actually might have reached most of his physical height already. You don't know. Do you see what I mean? So it's all subjective. Early developer, why is he an early developer? Is it because he's excelling? Is it because he's tall? But that doesn't mean he's an early developer. So it's having clear definitions for what do we mean when we say early developer or late developer. You know, high performing talent versus potential, performance versus potential. You know, you might have players who are high performing but low potential, and equally low performing but high potential. So how do you go into that? Attitude, effort, and ability. So what do we mean by that? What do we mean by attitude, effort, and ability? 4-corner model or 5-corner models and so on, technical, tactical age. So again, there's a host of different topics that you can discuss and really explore. And I mean, really encourage you to start to think about, what do we mean by these terms? And have we got a clear definition in our own mind of what we mean? And just going back to that, and we'll share some models as well, examples. I'd encourage you to really think about whether it's acronyms or phrases, certain values that you can use that will help you to really understand how you look for talent. Because in certain clubs, I've used certain acronyms or whatever that have spelled out something, and that's been our phrase, or it might be attitude, effort, and ability. And we're making decisions on players because of their attitude, their effort, and their ability. You know, people have used tips, people have used other things. So again, these are other areas that you can explore. You're going to watch this video and I want you to look at, what do you see? Because this will allow you to really start to develop your biases and understand how you can use your biases to work for you, not against you. This is Barcelona versus Real Madrid's academy teams, one of their youth teams at teenage ages. So again, start to look at some quality, stop the video, rewind it back. What are you noticing? What do you see? You may want to look at whether trying to see both teams or actually look at one team in particular. Can you identify certain individuals? What individuals do you like? What number was he wearing? Why do you like him? What player qualities are you seeing? So this is a fantastic example at the real top level of a youth academy teams from some of the biggest clubs in the world in football. And again, it'll be interesting to see, what did you see? What do you look for first? Whether it's looking at the player action from the keeper, the player's decision to release that ball, clever passes to break lines, how players are staying on the ball and finding ways to unlock defenses. Their intelligence, their movement, creativity. What is it that you're looking for? What do you like? What are some of the things that have attracted your eye? And again, it's interesting to look at it from the perspective of the player, because there's the game, but we'll obviously always try and reference the game when we're making decisions, and we're trying to play in the future as well. What does a future player look like? But we've also got to consider, what does their game look like? So you've got the game and you've got their game. So that's really important. And that's just a short video there for just over 2 minutes, nearly 3 minutes. Again, what did you see in that short period of time? You know, you were the individual that turned up and watched that game. You got to see a snippet of it. What did you see? And more importantly, who did you see? Okay. Here's another video for you to consider. Again, thinking about talent perception and recruitment. This is at a grassroots level in England from several years ago in the Junior Premier League. So again, very different level to what we saw with Barcelona and Real Madrid, but you may see similar qualities from certain individuals. Now, this video goes on for quite a few minutes, but just trying to give you a snapshot. It's interesting because obviously Mansfield Town are now a Category 3 academy. This was taken before they were obviously back in the Football League and were in an academy setup. And you'll see similar clubs will run development centres and even just, again, grassroots teams. But what are the players that you're identifying? What do you see? What are some traits that you go, oh, he's a good player? Why? Why do you think he's a good player? What did he do that made you think that? Again, the player there was releasing it first time. Was that good? Was that bad? I think it's great that he's thought of a player that he can play forward to and release it first time, which is fantastic. It's great to see that both teams are trying to construct the attack, build their attack, as well as find ways to finish. So again, another example, useful example of you to think about, what do you see? So what players stood out to you? What did you notice and why? Really spend time thinking about this. 10 minutes, minimum 10 minutes. If you need more, of course, use more. And think about that in terms of those two questions. And try and relate it to understanding your biases, but also thinking about the future game and the future player. What does the future game look like? What does the future player look like? What do you think the future game will look like in 10 years? And often, this will be a great task when trying to predict the future. What we don't want to do is we don't want to necessarily identify and nurture talent for the game of yesterday. We want to be playing in the future and thinking about the game of tomorrow. So what qualities are they going to have to possess in order to be successful? Okay. And how do we think this will affect or change how you recruit currently, how you recruit, retain, and regain? It's that phrase that we use right at the start. So what will the future game look like in 10 years or more? And how will this affect or change the way you recruit moving forward? Another task for you, 10 minutes minimum reflection, and really think about this. And some of you, people have used the platform already, have come back and gone, I still need to know more. We're still thinking about this now. It's ended up spiraling more and inspiring more conversation, which is great, because I want you to share your thoughts with a colleague in your environment. Start that conversation. Tap into what other people are doing in other environments. What do they think their future game will look like? And how has that affected or changed? If so, how so? And if not, why not? The way they recruit. Linking back to the future player, the future game. And if you're thinking, well, what does the future game look like? What would you want it to look like? If you could be in control, you're FIFA, and you're in control of deciding what the future game looks like, what would you do? What rules would you introduce? It's interesting because you might be actually predicting future rule changes. So this is a great way, a great task of thinking, well, what do you predict? But more so, what would you want it to look like in order to make the game more entertaining, more competitive, or whatever it may be? And this is a great insight into your values. Now, some interesting discussion topics that we've got to make reference to is knowing that, as we've said already, that learning is, and performance and recruitment is non-linear. The real world experiences of these young players follow, and certainly the perspective that we share with you, follow a non-linear dynamic trajectory, because we know that they're going to show different periods of success. They're going to go up and down. They're going to find difficulty, challenges, you name it. Some players will maybe sign for a certain academy, have difficulties, be released. Do they bounce back? Do they end up going somewhere else? So we know that it's non-linear, and there's a growing recognition for this. That's faced the ongoing difficulty and challenge that we've got around talent perception, talent development, talent identification. And it's interesting because if we know that learning, performance, talent is non-linear, why are we still wedded to this calendar lottery or DNA lottery of how we identify players? This lottery of making judgments purely on certain factors around when they were born, or other factors, their physical traits. Their mum and dad are really big. They had a history of being a player. We think they'll probably follow that trend. They might be bigger, whatever it may be. What are some of the other challenges around this? So have a think about what we mean by non-linear and calendar lottery. What are some of the key things that you should think about concerning these two particular areas? So again, what you're finding with this course is that it's inspiring more questions that will hopefully give you more answers in the future. And I would encourage you to check out some of the work that's going on with Mark O'Sullivan, AIK, that's influenced a lot of the work with the KMVB. There's some fantastic people within the KMVB right now who I'd encourage you to follow on Twitter and tap into. And again, some research articles here that look at the efficiency, the efficacy of talent identification and talent development programs, and this race to the top to get the the players that we've recruited at this level and wide, and how it gets smaller and smaller, you know, early age entry and then leading to earlier and earlier age exit. This level of survivorship bias, okay, which was obviously part of one of the research studies there that you can see. Because again, one of the things that players are often trying to figure out is they've got to learn first, how do I survive? Every year is retain and release for a young player. So they're continuously thinking, how do I survive? How do I last? Again, and other areas that you can think of. So this is a great screen for you to have a look and again inspire some more questions for you. And who does not get the opportunities and who does get the opportunities within your environments as a result of relative age effects, growth and early maturation, or selection biases. And selection bias is a key one. And you can see 2 research articles there that I would really encourage you to look at that have looked at the efficacy of talent selection in sport. And again, some of the methods that are used in football, in soccer, moving forward. And again, is this the most appropriate system? And that's what we're sharing with you now. And there's some great people, again, Mark O'Sullivan with AIK, James Vaughan, who's produced some of these models and frameworks. And I would encourage you to follow these guys on Twitter as well. There were some really leading experts in talent identification, development, and so on. And it's just asking the question, you know, is the system that we've got right now, this linear approach and age categories, and we're recruiting players at an even earlier and earlier and earlier age, and we're going down the realms of early, you know, premature professionalism, you know, and early selection. Is that the best way? Is it the most appropriate system? So how does talent develop? Okay, because again, with these 2 models here, you can see what people think, which is that linear approach, that rocket, and what it actually looks like, which is very messy. And how do we help them in these periods as well? And it's interesting that the KMVB are one of many that are adopting some of these strategies around an evidence-based approach to developing players. And this phrase, which is fantastic, which is as many as possible, for as long as possible, as good as possible. And that's something that Mark O'Sullivan and others have coined, that we're trying to think about how we identify and give an opportunity to everybody to receive this professional coaching, try and get as many as possible in for as long as possible. So it comes back to the recruit and the retain, and as good as possible. So again, what are the experiences that they're having, and how does that influence some of your recruitment strategies? Now, the key questions for you moving forward is we have to understand, obviously, what makes people be at their best. What makes you at your best? You know, where do you do your best thinking? Where do you right now do your best thinking? Is that different to some of the other people? And that might influence you when you're portraying information to people, or you're trying to be organized to have your thoughts clear. Where are people at their best to receive information? So again, when you're trying to convince people or make a decision to retain that player, fight for that player, or not, or bring somebody in, it's all that self-awareness. Okay, we have to understand as well, which is the opening question, what makes people at their best? So this individual, what makes him at their best? And what makes them at their not at their best? So what makes them struggle? What are some of the things that we need to be aware of that might actually have a limiting factor on that player? Or not, as the case may be, you know, sometimes healthy challenge is good as well. How do certain athletes and players respond to your coaching, your environments, your structures, the culture within your organization? And what qualities do they display? And are these different around other people? This is really, really deep stuff, because again, you can start to think about when you've got individuals in your environment, you're an academy coach watching this session, or a grassroots coach, or wherever you may be, what qualities are certain players displaying, and do they change when they're around certain people? How does that change when he's getting coached by this individual compared to when they're getting coached by you? Why is that? What do you need to change? What do they need to change? Do we need to change anything? How do we catch them at the best? How do we create opportunities so that we can help them be at their best? Okay. Now, these some interesting, again, further research for you to consider, key questions around that. There's many coaches and key stakeholders fail to consider a lot of the factors that I've shared with you today, and in specific reference to relative age effect growth, maturation, training age, which we talked a little bit about, and distinguishing amongst these effectively. Here's some articles that I'd encourage you to explore in more detail. And equally, there's a lot of coaches that just don't ask these questions. And this is the real brilliant, very difficult, but I say brilliant basics. It's the tough stuff, but it's the stuff that we've got to answer. Just having an understanding, a clarity behind what we mean when we say talent, what we mean when we say perception, when we say early developer, late developer, when we say at their best, at their worst, all these things, and understanding our bias and how that influences these things, as well as understanding the interaction between nature and nurture, which is critical for developing our understanding around talent identification, perception, and talent development. And there's a great article by Professor Williams and Matt Namara in 2020. And I would even encourage you to read Mark Williams' book recently, which is Elite, that you can get on Amazon as well, because there's some great examples in there as well. So we started with this at the start, which is recruit, retain, regain. And I really want you to consider this around understanding our bias, your bias. How do you recruit? How do you retain? And how do you regain? And again, why? Why is that important across recruit, retain, regain? Thank you for listening. Really excited to get your reflections on this course, and hopefully this will inspire some fantastic discussions for you and curiosity, and certainly some discussions in your organization that will hopefully improve the effectiveness and efficiency of how you work, reduce some of the noise, reduce some of the subjective or inaccuracies and premature judgments, and maybe help you become more aware of what you may not know, and having clarity around certain descriptions, and even having conversations with parents, which is crucial in this role when we're talking about talent identification and talent perception. There's going to be more courses added onto the platform that will build on this course and many others. Really excited to go on this journey with you, and stay curious. Thank you so much.